There is an episode of Girl Meets World that I remember very carefully, and it is season 3, episode 13. And in this episode, they are doing a culture project where Farkle learns about his great grandfather, who was Jewish but adopted by a Christian family in Denmark during World War II. And it led him to some initial confusion about his identity in holidays, but ultimately deepening his understanding of his heritage and the importance of finding himself. Now, I was watching The Sound of Music for the 1500th ish thousandth time, and it got me thinking about families similar to the Von Trapps. And then that got me thinking about to Operation Pedro Pan. Then it led me to remembering this episode of Girl Meets World. My brain did go down a weird rabbit hole, I know, you can say it. However, um, I decided that I thought I would Google and research some families, and organizations that help Jewish children flee from Europe in World War II. Um, and that, so I know it's weird, but if you're new here, hit that like button, hit that bell for notifications. Also, please subscribe. I'm a huge history nut, and if you're into stuff like this, I got the perfect show for you. I got the perfect channel for you to go to. On this very first edition of People of History, we are going to be talking about Cornelia Arnaldo Johanna Ten Boom, better known as Corrie Ten Boom, and she was who was a Dutch watchmaker and later a Christian writer and public speaker, who worked with her father Caspar, her sister Betsy, and other family members to help many Jewish people escape from the Nazis during the Holocaust in World War II by hiding them in her home. They were later caught and she was arrested and sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. And her most famous book, The Hiding Place, is a biography that recounts the story of her family's effort and how she found and shared hope in God while she was in prison at the concentration camp. So, Corrie was born on April 15th, 1892 in Haarlem, Netherlands, the youngest of Caspar, who was a jeweler and a watchmaker, and Cornelia, commonly known as Cor, Johanna Arnaldo, whom he married in 1884, and she was named after her mom, but known as Corrie all her life. Now, Corrie had three older siblings, Betsy, Willem, and Nolly. She had her maternal aunts lived with the family, and her father was fascinated with the craft of watchmaking and became so engrossed in his work that he forgot to charge his customers of his service. The Ten Boom family lived above Casper's watch shop in what Corey called the Beji, the Bebe, the Beye. There we go, the Beye. A house named for the I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce it, where they lived. And Corey later went on to be first part of the life that changed in the housekeeping. However, when a Cole sent Betsy, Corey's sister, to bed for an extended period, Corey took Betsy's place and began to work with the family's workshop. She quickly discovered that she loved the business side of the watch shop and that she organized the financial proceedings by developing a system of billings and ledgers. Even though Betsy recovered, Corey kept her place in the shop, and Betsy managed the housework to the light of both of them. Now, she was trained as a watchmaker herself, and in 1922, she became the first woman licensed as a watchmaker in the Netherlands over the next decade. In addition to working her father's shop, she established a youth club for teenage girls, which provided religious instructions and classes in the performing arts, sewing, and handicrafts. She and her family were Calvinist Christians in the Dutch Reformed Church, and their faith inspired them to serve their society, which they did by offering shelter, food, and money to those who were in need. Some important tenets of their faith included the fact that the Jews were precious to God and that all were created equal. Powerful motivation for the selfless rescue, and that she would later become involved in. In May of 1940, something called World War II would happen where the Germans would invade the Netherlands, and one of their restrictions was the banning of the youth club. And in May of 1942, a well dressed woman came to the Ten Booms with a suitcase in her hand, and she told them that she was a Jew. Her husband had been arrested several months earlier, and her son had gone into hiding, and occupation authorities had recently visited her, so she was afraid to go back. She heard that the Ten Booms had previously helped their Jewish neighbors, the Wells, and asked if they could help her too. Casper readily agreed and said that she could stay with them, although the police headquarters was only a half a block away. A devoted reader of the Old Testament, he believed that Jews were the chosen people, as he told the woman in this household, and God's people were always welcome. Now, Corrie and her sister Betsy opened their home to Jewish refugees and members of the resistance movement. As a result, they were sought out by the Gestapo and its Dutch counterpart. And the refugee worked with the Ten Boom and her sisters, did the Baye become known as the Dutch resistance, which was sent to the architects to Ten Boom home. And the family will build a secret hiding place and an alert buzzer that could be used to warn refugees to get into it as quickly as possible. Thus, the Ten Booms created a hiding place. The secret room was in Corey's bedroom behind a false wall and would hold 6 people. A ventilation system was installed for the occupants. A buzzer could be heard in the house to warn the refugees to get into the room as quickly as possible during the security sweeps through the neighborhood, and they had plenty of room, but wartime shortages meant food was scarce. Every non Jewish Dutch person had to receive a ration card, and this requirement was obtaining weekly food coupons. Though through her charitable work, Ten Boom knew many people in Harlem and remembered a family with a disabled daughter whose father was a Civil War servant who was in charge of the local ration card office, and she went to his house one evening, and when he asked how many ration cards she needed, I opened my mouth to say 5. Tim Boone wrote in a hiding place, but the number that unexpected and astonishing came out was 100, and he gave them to her, and that she provided cards to every Jew she met. Now, Ten Boom's involvement with the Dutch resistance zoo grew beyond gathering stolen rations and cards and harboring Jews in her home. She soon began to be part of the Dutch underground resistance, and saw a network of smuggling Jews to safe places. All in all, it was an estimated to be around 800 Jews who were saved by the Ten Boom's efforts. Now let's talk about her arrest, her detention, and her release for a second. On February 28, 1944, a Dutch informant, jo- Jan Vogel, told the Nazis about the Ten Boom's work. And at around 12:30, give or take, p.m. of that day, the Nazis would arrest the entire Ten Boom family, and they were sent to the Sovereign Fit prison when resistance materials and extra ration cards were found in the home. There were a group of 6 hidden in the Ten Booms made up by both Jews and resistance workers that remain undiscovered. Though the house was under constant surveillance after the Ten Booms' arrest, police officers who were also members of the resistance group coordinated the refugees' escape. Ten Boom received a letter one day in prison saying, "All the watches in your cabinet are safe," meaning that the refugees had managed to escape and were safe. And on the third day after the raid, resistance workers transferred them to other locations, and although the Gestapo arrested over 30 people who were in the family home that day, though the Gestapo soon released the 30 people they had captured that day, Corrie, Betsy, and their father Casper were held in prison. Casper would die 10 days later. Corrie was initially held in solitary, and after 3 months, she was taken into her first hearing. At her trial, she spoke about her work with the people and her mental disabilities. The Nazi lieutenant scoffed because the Nazis had been killing individuals with mental disabilities for years by their eugenics policy. And Ten Boom defended her work by saying that the eyes of God, a mentally disabled person might be more valuable than a watchmaker or a lieutenant. Now, Corey and Betsy were soon sent from Scavengingen to Herzenbusch. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name up. And this was a political concentration camp, also known as Camp Vault. And finally to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, a women's labor camp in Germany. Now there they held worship services after the hard days by using the Bible that they had managed to smuggle in. The two sisters' teachings and examples and the unfailing charity many of the prisoners converted to Christianity, and while at the imprisoned Ravensbrück, Bessie and her sister also began to discuss plans for founding a place for healing after the war. Bessie's health would deteriorate and she would die December 16, 1944, at the age of 59. But before that, she would tell her sister, "There is no pit so deep that he is not deeper still." 12 days later, was released. Corey was released, and afterward, she told that her release was because of a clerical error, and that a week later, all the women in the age group were all sent to gas chambers. Now, Ten Boom would return home in the middle of a hunger winter as she opened the doors to people with disabilities who were hiding in fear of execution. Let's talk about life after the war. After the war, Ten Boom would return to the Netherlands and set up a rehabilitation center in Bloemendaal in the refuge house concentration camps survivors until 1950 exclusively sheltered jobless Dutch who had collaborated with the Germans during the occupation, um, after which had accepted anyone in need of help care. Now, she returned to Germany in 1946, where she would meet with and forgive two Germans who had been employed at Ravensbrück, and one of whom had been particularly cruel to Betsy. And Ten Boom went on to travel the world as a public speaker, appearing in more than 60 countries, and she would write many books during this time. One of those books is titled Tramp for the Lord, and is written in late 1960s and early 1970s. In each chapter tells a short, different story about her travels and sharing the gospel message in Africa, Europe, in the Americas, Asia, and even in the difficult to reach and dangerous countries such as the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, Cuba, and China. And it features photographs of Tin Boom and her important messages of forgiveness, hope, love, and salvation through the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Now, Tin Boom would tell the story of her family members in their World War II with her best-selling book, The Hiding Place, which was made into a 1975 worldwide pictures film, The Hiding Place, which was starred actors like Jeanette Clift, Jolie Harris. And in 1977, the 85-year-old Corey would migrate to Placentia, California. In 1978, she suffered two strokes. The first rendered her unable to speak, and the second resulted in paralysis. She died on her 91st birthday, April 15, 1983, after suffering a third stroke. Ten Boom was buried in Fairhaven Memorial Park in Santa Ana, California. There is also a sequel to the film called Returning to the Hiding Places, which was released in 2011 in the UK, and in 2013 it was released in the US. And the film is based on Hans Pauli's book, which painted a broader picture of the circles in which she was a part of. Now, this was a very important person that we really need to talk about, and Corrie Ten Boom and her family, with great efforts, did all they could to help Jews, and this is why they're going down in history. Thank you all for listening.